What is a woman? It seems simple enough, doesn't it? Yet, in 1949, when Simone de Beauvoir asked this very question, it caused uproar, controversy, and an intellectual revolution that would ripple through the next century. The Second Sex isn't just a book. It's a manifesto, a philosophical treatise, a quiet revolution bound in pages. When Beauvoir published Le Deuxième Sexe, The Second Sex, France was recovering from the trauma of World War II. Existentialism, the philosophy of freedom and responsibility championed by Beauvoir's lifelong partner, Jean-Paul Sartre, dominated Parisian cafes and lecture halls. But even among existentialists, the concept of womanhood remained largely unquestioned. A mysterious continent. Beauvoir dared to explore it. Yet what surprises us today is that The Second Sex wasn't part of any feminist wave or movement when first published. In fact, it appeared 20 years before the birth of the feminist MLF movement in France, and over a decade before Betty Friedan's influential work, The Feminine Mystique in America. In June of 1949, Simone de Beauvoir was already recognised as an influential writer, but still primarily identified as Sartre's companion. With the release of The Second Sex, she would forever step out of his shadow. And not quietly. She stepped out boldly, defiantly. But who exactly was Simone de Beauvoir? Born into a conservative bourgeois family in Paris, Beauvoir defied expectations early on. Despite her father's dismissive remark, "You are ugly, my poor girl," Simone responded not with retreat, but rebellion, devouring books, philosophy, and mathematics. At 21, she became the youngest person to pass the prestigious philosophy aggregation exam, second only to Jean-Paul Sartre. Notably, though they scored equally, the rules of the time forced Beauvoir into second place, simply because she was female. Perhaps, from that moment, she understood intimately the injustice she would later write about. Interestingly, despite her groundbreaking academic achievements, Beauvoir was initially indifferent to feminist struggles, believing socialism would inevitably end sexism. It was only later, between 1949 and 1969, that she recognised feminism as its own necessary struggle. Before The Second Sex, Beauvoir's novels and essays had already established her intellectual prowess. Yet, she recalls in her autobiography that initially she didn't consider gender an issue. Sartre once challenged her, "You were not raised as a boy. Perhaps you should examine that more closely." She took his suggestion and discovered what she termed a revelation. The world she lived in had been shaped entirely by male perspectives, by myths and prejudices crafted and perpetuated by men. Simone, stunned by this epiphany, abandoned plans for a mere personal confession and began a broader inquiry into the condition of all women. In The Second Sex, Beauvoir declares boldly, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman." This sentence, so deceptively simple, became a rallying cry. Beauvoir argued that being female is a biological reality, but becoming a woman is a cultural imposition. Throughout history, women had been seen as the other, defined only in relation to men. She dismantled millennia of misconceptions, from Aristotle, who called women deficient males, to Freud, who described womanhood as a dark continent. The public reaction was fierce. François Mauriac denounced it as obscene. Albert Camus claimed it insulted the Latin male, and Jeanette Torres Vermeersch labelled it an insult to working women. Such outrage drove curiosity and sales. 22,000 copies sold out in just the first week. The Vatican placed it on their index of forbidden books, and yet, around the globe, Beauvoir became the most read feminist author. This scandal was heightened by Beauvoir's bold exploration of taboo topics: sexual freedom, motherhood, abortion, and domestic exploitation, unheard of in a philosophical text by a woman at the time. This audacity sparked both admiration and ferocious criticism, showing how groundbreaking her views truly were. In America, 2 million copies were quickly sold, sparking an intellectual wildfire. Across Japan, The Second Sex topped bestseller lists for an entire year. Translated into dozens of languages, from Hebrew to Tamil, the book shattered boundaries everywhere it travelled. It did not just enter bookstores, it entered consciousness, challenging and reshaping views on marriage, motherhood, sexuality, and gender roles. At the heart of her argument was existential freedom, the belief that everyone must define their own existence rather than having it defined for them. Beauvoir's existentialist perspective meant confronting uncomfortable truths. To be free, she declared, women must stop being the eternal other. Today, nearly 75 years later, the profound influence of The Second Sex remains undeniable. Even when unread, Beauvoir's work profoundly impacts contemporary discourse around gender, identity, and equality, shaping modern feminist thought globally. Beauvoir didn't plead for special treatment, but absolute equality. The book forced readers, male and female alike, to question deep-seated assumptions about identity and power. Interestingly, feminist movements of the 1960s and 1970s emerged decades after Beauvoir's groundbreaking work. Yet, her ideas directly inspired countless future activists and authors, including Betty Friedan. Throughout her life, Beauvoir continually defied societal expectations. Even into her 70s, she remained fiercely engaged in feminist activism, reflecting a youthful curiosity and commitment to the feminist cause, far from the distant intellectual often portrayed in media. At her life's end, Beauvoir remained engaged, still challenging conventional wisdom. When criticised for not being a mother herself, she famously retorted, "Should ethnologists only write about tribes they belong to?" Such sharp responses epitomised her life's mission. Question everything. Critically, some of Beauvoir's points are now seen differently, given modern scientific developments and changing social attitudes. Yet her insistence that women's biology does not dictate their destiny has proved enduringly relevant, especially in current dialogues about gender and identity. In the closing lines of The Second Sex, Simone de Beauvoir offers a vision of equality grounded not in conflict but recognition and freedom. She wrote movingly, "The day when it will be possible for women to love not in her weakness but in her strength, then love will become for her, as for man, a source of life, not mortal danger." Simone de Beauvoir didn't just write a book. She ignited a consciousness, a questioning that continues to this day. Nearly 75 years later, the profound questions she posed remain as powerful, provocative, and necessary as ever. So, returning to the beginning, what is a woman? Beauvoir would likely say it's a question we each must answer for ourselves, freely and without constraints. And perhaps in that freedom lies the true power of the second sex.